So here are my questions to you. I'd like you to, for a moment, think about what is something that absolutely amazes you, or what is something that life or COVID is teaching you right now, personally or professionally. So one thing that amazes you, or what is one thing life or COVID is teaching you right now. I'm going to take the first 5 minutes. I'm going to put you into breakout groups. I'd like you to turn your camera on. I'd like you to introduce yourself and just pick the question and share a little bit about yourself, either what's amazing you right now or what life is teaching you right now. So I'm going to see if we can make this work, and hopefully we can. I'm going to make... We are at roughly 40 people, so I am going to make 10 breakout rooms. So when you see the invitation, please accept and see if we can go in there, and if we're just testing to see if the breakout room capacity is going to work for us this afternoon. I will see you in about 4 minutes. Okay, let's talk about my initial questions. What I'm looking for here today is for you to send me a note in the text. Why are you here today? What do you hope to learn? What's your definition of trust? And tell me about a time as a coach you did not feel safe in your role. I want some context. I'd love some content. I'm starting where you are. I'm looking for the chat here. If you could type that in for me to start to actually show that you are here with me in the room. And those of you with your cameras on, I'm super grateful. I'm actually better when I see real people versus just names on the screen. If you're still in your pajamas at this point in time of the day, that's totally cool too. I don't judge anything that people are wearing. Thank you. How to manage better moving forward. Young people, great, thank you. Dean, Brian, Hans. Come on, folks. Throw me a bone. When you feel free. Okay, cool. Yes, thanks, Hans. Trust is that ability to feel free with being yourself. I'm okay, you're okay. Thank you to those who are leaning in and typing for me. Youth and parents. Thanks, Joni. There's some great thoughts here. This is just helping me kind of get some context for all of you. All right. Thank you for those who've given me a few things. Continue to kind of send me notes through the chat. I am going to be watching them. And it helps me understand what's resonating, what questions do you have. No question is a dumb question, because this is a topic that actually I think is really fascinating for me as somebody who spent a good portion of my career in the corporate workspace. The idea of psychological safety and trust is a term that actually was emerging in the late 90s. And what's really fascinating to me is that it's something that we're starting to test, measure, and monitor, even still to this day in our organization. So the founder of the term psychological safety in teams was a woman by the name of Amy Edmondson. And she was out of, I believe, Harvard University. And then what was interesting is in 2015, she was hired by Google and her team and went and studied the 300 most high-performance teams that Google had. And after looking at all the different reasons around why they got results, how they sustain results in the corporate space, Google realized that the foundation of high-performing teams was psychological safety and trust. And over the last year and a half in my work with some of our high performance programs here in the sport programs in the country, we've gone right to this base layer to really measure, monitor, and get curious around, do we know what trust is? It's a term we throw around a lot, but defining it and actually making it something that is tangible, meaningful, and understandable sometimes eludes us. So here's my plan for today. I want to talk about psychological safety and why it matters, I believe, to the coaching. I want to actually break apart trust and kind of build a bit of an anatomy around it, how it actually shows up in our bodies and our brains, our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. And then I want to sort of play with what I call the fundamentals of how do we do that with parents, with athletes, with ourselves, with our peers, and so many more across the system. So I'm hoping you've brought a curious mind, because I do believe that some of the things I'm going to share with you might be new. I did a pilot group with another group of coaches recently, and for many people, they were like, this is new. So the fact that you don't know it, that's totally okay. So let me start. When I think about the essence, like the real core of what it means to be a great coach and or a great leader, and I put those two terms together because I fundamentally believe in my entire being that coaches are leaders in our communities. I believe that really the fundamental part of our job is to set direction, whether it's for a practice, for a club, for a program, take others with us. In other words, get people so committed to that vision and that direction, they can't wait to be there with you all the time. Westing through walls, showing up ready to perform, all that kind of good stuff with their questions, their ideas. They want to just continue to make it better and better, and that we do the right thing. And that term, do the right thing, can kind of be quite broad. But in order to set direction, take others with us, and do the right thing, there's kind of three fundamentals that research would tell us that we need to do that well. First one is to build trust. The next one is to actually build a team. In other words, the real identity of who we are. And then the third thing is to actually build a feedback-rich environment. In other words, what's the flow of communication? Because if it's always flowing one way down, I can tell you you're not building a high trust, high safety situation. So let's talk about what is safety? Because when we can actually build it, build trust, build safety, build a team that has or a club with very clear identity, and we build a feedback-rich environment where everyone feels seen, heard, and known, we have more influence, more impact, and the people and their performance is actually something that is elevated. So let's talk about psychological safety. And there's a difference between, like, the safety and trust are connected, but there's kind of a difference between the two. Psychological safety is a belief that no matter what I say or do, I'm not going to be punished or humiliated socially for speaking up and sharing my ideas, my questions, my concerns, or dare I say even making a mistake. In other words, it's my ability to show up as me, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and for you to show up as you, or the language I use with young people when I'm like, I'm okay and you're okay. You get to have your thoughts, wants, feelings, needs, beliefs, background, and I get to have mine. And our job is to figure out how do we safely show up in that space together. Simple, not always easy because of our biology. But one of the things that we have to appreciate is the muscle that we're trying to connect to build trust and safety is the one in our head. Because the environments that we shape in our clubs, in our practices, in our pools, in swimming, shape the mindset, the beliefs, the behaviors, and the results of ourselves and others. We have so much influence, whether we like it or not. And this beautiful muscle in our head is actually what is the most important thing for us to understand. So I'm going to do something kind of silly for a second, just to give you a quick tour of your brain, because it's going to make sense as we get into some of this stuff. And so if you are familiar at all with Dan Siegel and his work, The Whole Brain Child, Brainstorm, which is his book around brain development in teenagers, or The Developing Mind, he's a psychiatrist, and he's also somebody who works very much in collaboration around how do we raise healthier, better, more mindful children, more resilient. So he's got great books. I love him. But one of the things I love about him is he simplified the brain into what he calls the hand model of the brain. And I actually teach this to kids in classrooms. So this is kind of sometimes a really important thing is, so imagine this is your brain, okay? Kind of like, you know, sitting in your head like this. My wrist and the back of my hand represents the cerebellum in my brainstem. So it's the part that connects actually to my entire nervous system. My thumb actually represents the limbic system. This is the part of my brain in the center that is the home of my emotions, my memories, and my habits. And the part that wraps over top is my cortex. And there's 4 lobes in my cortex, but the one that really matters in relationship, communication, problem solving, and dealing with all the stuff we need to deal with is the part that sits right here, my prefrontal cortex. It's the part of my brain that actually does problem solving, decision making, making choices, figuring things out. Now, something you need to know in terms of working with young people is that this part of our brain isn't fully formed till we're about mid-20s, around 25. Through the time of our teenage years is when our brain is actually shedding and doing a whole bunch of restructuring. So we're actually operating from our emotional brain, which is why so often we find teenagers irrational and whatever else. But here's the thing we need to understand about this muscle, okay? It's, there's 4 fundamental things I want you to know about it. One is our brain as a muscle is a social creature. It is hardwired. It's hardwired for connection. That's why the pandemic has been so hard for all of us. Some people sent me a note going, I'm so grateful to be on the pool deck today working with kids. I get it. Being in real life contact with kids and other people is actually healthy for us. Whether we're extroverted or introverted, we all need at least 1 or 2 relationships because it actually is good for this. It's why we've got all this mental health conversation going on. Here's the other thing we need to know about our brain. We are hardwired for love and safety. Love is the emotion of connection, and safety is actually fear's gift to us. So the emotion fear is our gift. It's always trying to decide whether this feels safe to me or not. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Everything we say or do, our behaviors, are hardwired habits. In other words, we need to appreciate, much like we do when we think about breaking apart the sport of swimming and trying to train the muscles between breaststroke, backstroke, butterfly, and free. We tend to break it down, practice it over and over again until then it starts to flow and we get speed and we get velocity and a whole bunch of stuff. Same thing in terms of our relational and learning muscle is here. So anything that we do today, we've practiced it for so long. Anything that we're trying to do new, it's like writing with our opposite hand. Here's a really simple way for me to demonstrate how your brain works if you're willing to play with me. If you're there with a pen and paper, I'd love for you to sign your name like you normally do. And then what I'd love for you to do is to put the pen in your opposite hand, and I'd like you to sign your name exactly the same way. Anybody notice a difference? That you'd be willing to pop your camera on and tell me what the experience was like for you so I know somebody's out there. It
was puzzling.
What else? When you say puzzling, what does that mean, Stu, for you?
Means it almost felt like I didn't know how to write my own name.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's the challenge for us as adults. We hate looking bad and we hate not knowing what we want to do. And when we start to play with this thing called trust and safety, or we start to actually respond versus react to the way the world is going around us because there's so much uncertainty, we are actually hardwiring our brain when we do something new and different. And what we know from science and neuroscience, when I think about this muscle, the more often I repeat something the same way, the more I create a new hardwired pathway. So you have a neural pathway called writing your signature. And if over time you broke your hand or you had to learn to write with your opposite hand, which they actually used to do way, way back when, my mother was forced to do that, with enough practice, you can make it happen. We can rewire our brains at any point in time in our lives. And here's the other thing we need to understand about this beautiful brain. When we have big emotions or we get hooked in our busy and stressed, stress makes us stupid. And by that I mean, and I'm going to use Dan Siegel's language, we flip our lid. So, Stephanie, I loved your question around, so how do I deal with the crazy that people are expressing? And I'm sure it's COVID. I just want you to remember, people are speaking from their emotional place, even though they think they're really logical, but they've actually flipped their lid. And the greatest thing, and I'm going to play with this over the course of today, is there's skills we can build that actually help people put their lid back on. Just like we have to learn how to put our own lid back on when we've gotten ourselves so stressed out. So the busier we are, the most stressed we are. I just need you to understand your emotional brain is driving the bus. The logical brain isn't. So your ability to actually problem solve and respond thoughtfully actually is compromised. Science over and over and over and over again. It's why this mental performance or this idea of connections, trust, and safety is super important for us. Because when people feel safe, even in the pressure to perform, or even if they're, in the grips of their emotion, when I feel safe, in other words, I won't be humiliated, shamed, judged for being wherever I am, my lid doesn't flip as hard or as long. Simple kind of analogy. Hopefully you get it. And if you don't, pop your camera on and ask me a question. Because here's what's going on with your brain. Every point in time, every interaction we have with the world, and COVID has just like, poof, exploded it. But our brains are designed to keep us safe and to keep us safe socially, physically, and emotionally. And so your brain, this thing here, imagine my eyes are sitting here where my fingertips are, scanning the world. Is this safe or not safe? And then it assigns an emotion, and then it has a thought, and then we actually act or don't act. And so one of the things we have to appreciate is our brains are actually feeling creatures that think, not thinking creatures that feel. I'm not going to get into that too much today, but what I really want you to appreciate is that at every point in time, anybody who interacts with you their brain is making a split-second decision whether they should actually approach or avoid. And the interesting thing I think about it, and hopefully you find this, is that because we're social creatures, we experience social pain at a greater degree than physical pain. And the interesting thing is I don't know if you've ever done this, cut yourself, broken at something, or injured yourself and then rehabbed it. But in the moment of it, the pain is really bad. But to recall that pain, it's really tough. But if you've ever been left out, left behind, bullied, ridiculed, put down, criticized, talked to in a condescending way, you can probably remember the pain of that pretty quickly. Our brains are always deciding by our words and our actions. Do I approach or I avoid? And I referred to his work in my talk on Saturday, but David Rock, of the Neuroscience Leadership Institute, he actually talks about this idea of SCARF. So there are social triggers that actually allow people to go, I move forward or I move back. And the things that cause us to avoid are when we feel like those things are dismissed, discounted, or ignored, or belittled. But if all of them are honored, appreciated, and validated, whether or not they're agreed to, in other words, again, that I'm okay, you're okay, then I'm going to approach and stay in the conversation. So whether I'm managing athlete to athlete, to a parent, to an admin, I got to understand that when people are reacting to me, I have triggered one or more of these things. Status. It's that feeling of respect. So it could be like a relative status hierarchical, but that's actually not really what it is. It's a lot of us is feeling the status of being included or actually respected. Certainty is about knowing what's happening next. Now, if there's one thing COVID's done, it's triggered us all. Because just when we thought we knew what was going on, it changed. So certainty is knowing what's happening next. The greatest thing we can do to build trust and safety for ourselves and the people that look to us for leadership is, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and here's what I'm doing to find out what we do next. Because those are the things we can control. And when we make visible to people what we do know and what we don't know, we actually calm the brain to go, oh, okay. And if we tell them what we're going to do about it. But I think one of the biggest challenges is people have given us all this level of certainty. Our politicians, our leaders have said, here's what's going to happen. And then they disappoint us and we get ticked off or upset or whatever. Autonomy is feeling like I have some control. So when you're feeling stressed out and freaking out about it in your own personal way, one of the things you can say to yourself or others is, what can you do? What do I have control over right in this moment? Because giving ourself a sense that we have some influence or impact on things around us is a very calming thing to our brain. Relatedness is feeling in on things. So this is the reason too why when we think about safe sport, we think about trust and safety, making sure our communication is inclusive, it's visible, and it's in front of everybody, us, they all hear the same thing at the same time, is actually making sure people don't feel that there's little clicks here and there. It's why I do an awful lot of communication now using some really interesting video techniques, even whether it's off on my phone or there's software out there, I can just record it quickly on my computer, and rather than send a long-winded email, I can go, hey, I got your email. Here are the 3 things that I'm thinking about from it. I'd love to talk to you about it more, because I think if we had a real live conversation versus a long email, we'd figure it out. Because then people feel like that, they're connected into that. And fairness doesn't mean everything equal, but it needs to feel fair and reasonable. And when people don't say it's fair, then we need to lean in and get curious. So the anatomy of trust and safety starts with us understanding that this beautiful muscle in our brain is designed the same for every single person. We all come to the situation with different lived and learned experiences, but by and large, we are always first going, do I feel like I'm accepted or not? So can I approach versus avoid? And are my social needs being clarified? The top 10 triggers, behaviors that get people riled up and crazy are these ones. Not being treated unfairly, not feeling appreciated, not being heard or listened to, somebody takes credit for my work, somebody actually kept waiting or never got a reply to my email, so that just feels like I'm not respected, criticized, blamed, deadlines that are unrealistic but no conversation around what we can do versus we can't, and people who think they know it all. And here's the crazy thing for us as creatures and as leaders. The more stressed out we are, the more uncertainty we feel, the more we double down on needing control. In other words, we default always back to our experience and our expertise, what I've done before. When really what we need to do is get really curious and make sure we understand and explore what we can do versus what we can't. Does this make sense? The radio silence is killing me, I gotta tell you. So using the chat would be helpful because at least it's here in front of me. Or popping on and telling me, you know, wow, this is cool, or I don't understand, can you talk to this? You will get more out of it the more you hang out in this conversation with me, I can tell you that for sure. Can I show the 10 threats again? I absolutely can. And of course I can also share some of this. So I mean, there's a long list. We each have our own top 10. Like if you ever sat down and said, what are the things that people could say or do to you as a coach that would tick you off or cause you actually not show up as your best? Because I know some of mine. Not showing up on time, not actually asking, you know, if you don't agree, saying I don't agree and here's why and here's what I'd love to offer because I love to learn. But if you think about sort of our top 3, what you could do to erode trust with me is not be curious, not show up on time, and not be willing to be in conversation. I'm curious as to what your 3 are, and do your athletes and parents know that? Here's what's okay in my program. Here's what's not okay. It's like language I say. It's okay to disagree with me. What's not okay is to disagree and dismiss me, or to disagree to somebody else and not to my face. So this is what we're going to play with today. If you really want to start to build trust and safety, is what are the behaviors? Because if you don't know what your behaviors are that can cause you to feel threatened or unsure, those are the things we got to start with, because it's the language in which we can start to actually use to build with our kids, because we need to model for them what trust looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And we do that one conversation at a time. Because at the end of the day, if you think of all of us just as icebergs, you're an iceberg, I'm an iceberg. And above the water line, all you can see is what I'm saying and my facial expression and what I'm doing. And you make judgments about that. Below the waterline are my thoughts, and below that are my feelings, and below that are my beliefs, and below that is my identity. And the more I build trust and curiosity in my program and in my pool, I'm lowering the waterline. And sometimes I say to people, you know what? When you see behavior that doesn't make sense to you, or your first reaction is, what a jerk. Just remember, you don't know the thoughts, the feelings, or the triggers that have been going on below the surface. And the most important thing you can do is go, something's going on. What's going on? Whether it's an athlete, whether it's a parent, whether it's a board member, whether it's a peer, or even whether it's me. So here's what I'd love for you to do on your piece of paper, if you would. One of the things, no, actually I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the research in psychological safety in sport, just so that you know that I'm just not telling you what I want you to hear, but there's actually some validity too in the sports space. Here's a couple things I want you to understand. When we as coaches and leaders take the time to actually build trust and psychological safety in our programs and in our places, when trust and safety are positive and healthy, what we do is we actually build a sense of team. And the team's ability to win and lose together, or win with grace or lose with grace, is also something that starts to happen, because we've been very clear around what's okay and what's not okay around here. And the other thing is, even if I lose, if I've got a team or a place that feels safe and okay, then I'm not afraid of what's going to happen, even if I don't do what I hope to do. So I will have a level of satisfaction with my performance, and I will probably have a bit of a growth mindset that says, hey coach, what can I do better next time? But if our environments are more shame and fear based, in other words, those are the two emotions and the way we can show up that actually erode trust and safety, what we're going to see is burnout, and we're going to start to see injury. We're going to start to hear complaining. You'll see acting out. Because what people are looking for is connection and attention. And when we give them the right kind of attention and connection, they're going to perform the way we want them to perform, because we've got really clear, here's what's okay in our program and here's what's not okay. Because again, psychological safety is a belief that I won't be punished for making a mistake, but if I show up at my best and do my best, then, and I'm supported for that, I'm going to keep going. The other thing that we need to appreciate around psychological safe spaces is this. Those psychologically safe spaces have taken the time and put the energy into actually defining the behaviors and the culture we want in our team program. What are our norms? What are the traditions and the things that we do? And what are the standards of our behavior? And it's not about being perfect. Like, I think the most important thing we can do in a psychologically safe space is make being perfectly imperfect human beings, yourself included, normalized. We're going to have good days and we're going to have bad days, but as long as we pull together to support each other through them, that's the best. We actually build relationships with people. I had a conversation with somebody in our high performance sports system one day who said to me, Judy, look, I'm dealing with high-performance athletes. There's the athlete, and then there's the person, and we treat them differently. And I remember saying to this individual, and I go, so who am I talking to today? Am I talking to the person or the person with the title? He goes, well, that makes no sense. You're talking to me. And I go, well, I want to go back to what you just said. Who we are is how we lead. So the person is the title, and the title is the person. Same thing with the athlete. The most important label our children or our athletes have is their personal name. When we use it and get to know who is behind that name, that is the most important thing we can do. When we build places where people have a positive intention towards each other. So we can still compete against each other, but how do we congratulate and win together and lose together, or find the thing to sort of make the competition healthy versus unhealthy? Because one of the things we love to do is compare and rank. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. It's how we do it that is the difference between a safe and unsafe environment. So when we see unpsychologically safe spaces, we don't see a lot of laughter. We don't see a lot of smiling. We don't see people admitting mistakes. We see an awful lot of blame. And the fear of failure is greater than the desire to learn and grow. So this is going to be too wordy for this screen, but I'm going to say it to you anyway, and I'm going to make sure that we find a way to post this in feed loop afterwards so you have access to it. If you want to know whether your space is psychologically safe or not, here are some things you look for. How much do people talk in meetings or in practices? How many questions do you get? When we make a mistake, do we blame it on the weather, on COVID, on whether or not my mom got me to practice or not? Or do I go, well, that wasn't very good. What do I need to do to make it better? Do we avoid difficult conversations? Do we talk over one another or talk at versus talk with? Do we actually make sure that feedback is helpful versus hurtful and it actually validates the progress that is being made versus what's still screwing up? And I say that word intentionally because I think sometimes the words we use sometimes are not necessarily helpful. They're more judgmental. Feedback needs to be nourishing. And when it's not nourishing, nobody's learning. It's actually triggering people's brains to go, alert, alert, this person is here to make me not feel good. When people can't ask for help, and when we actually don't hear people sharing their different points of view, or even, hey, here's my life experience. Those are the kinds of things that tell us that psychological safety is low. And when we're dealing with psychologically low safe spaces, we are not tapping into the most potential in each person, including ourselves. And we certainly are not actually maximizing performance potential as well. And whether somebody actually is a master swimmer or a beginner swimmer, when you think about the people in your life who had the most positive impact on you, they found the good and kept stretching you forward. And that was psychological safety. You've lived it, hopefully, at one place, one person in your life. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between trust and safety. Trust is something I give to you and you give to me. It's sort of this idea of my willingness to be vulnerable with you, let you see what it is that I'm thinking and feeling or wanting or needing. And it's actually something that we decide together. Psychological safety is almost this bigger feeling around me. Do I believe other people have my back? Does it feel okay? Is it safe for me to actually be me? So it's not uncommon on teams and in spaces where, I hear this quite often. Well, there's some people on this team that I really trust. But you do not have a high-performing program. And when I say high-performing, I don't mean it's like on the way towards the Olympic and Paralympic Games. I'm just saying you don't have a program that's operating at its optimal place in space as the coach and leader of that program if not everybody feels like no matter what happens. And that takes work. It takes conversation. And everybody loves to first tell me, Judy, you don't understand how busy you are. You know what? We're all busy. I get it. But if you connect first before content, and you create spaces that people actually want to lean in and learn from, you are going to grow your membership. You have people keep coming back. It's why we see people club shopping, in my experience. It's why I've done it as a parent of 2 teenagers who love sport. If it didn't feel safe, or it wasn't that fun, or I didn't actually make new friends, or that it just felt like I always was yelled at, I can take my time and money somewhere else. And on one hand, one of the things we have to appreciate is that psychological safety and trust is not about really being nice and like That's the thing that gets confused, and that's where we get into problems. Psychological safety and trust is born when we really get clear on here's what's okay around here. And when you come and work with me as your coach, this is what you can expect. Like I say this to my clients. If you don't want the truth told, you don't want me in your organization. Because I'm here to make you look great. And I'm actually here to make you better. And that comes from my big heart. But here's the other thing is if you want somebody to tell you what you want to hear or not tell you what you don't want to hear and you don't want to deal with the brutal facts, you do not want me in there. And I've had people go, oh, I just wanted a nice little training session. I go, great, I'll do that. But if stuff comes up and I have a perception or I learn something about your organization, I'm going to tell you. And if I tell you and you do nothing about it, I've eroded the culture in your space. So I don't say it as a threat. I say it as I have a genuine desire for those individuals, teams, and organizations that truly want to be world-class high performance in whatever space they are. Let's go get clear on what's working and what's not. And let's just keep making it safer, better, and smarter for all of us. Because at the end of the day, I believe all of us get out of the bed, or at least most of us, wanting to make a difference in the world in whatever that is. However big or small a difference that is, it's still a difference. That's purpose. And whether I'm 5 or 75, I think there's a way for us as coaches and leaders to create that purpose for everybody. All through just starting with trust and safety. Because here's what happens when we overinvest in it, and then I'm going to take a pause and sort of check in with the group. Here's what happens when I actually am aware that everything I say or do as the leader of a program or in a pool or in a role, that all my words and actions have a ripple effect. So in other words, remember, every brain that is actually around me is deciding at all times based on what I say or do, whether this feels safe to approach and give you everything I've got thinking, feeling, or not. And so when we become more aware of how we're showing up and we start to build this clarity around, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm hearing, here's what's okay, here's what's not okay. What can I say or do as your coach that would absolutely cause you not to trust me? What's the most important thing I could do that would make you keep coming back here and giving me as much effort as you are today? It doesn't have to be complicated questions. What do you love about swimming? What do you not like about swimming? What would make swimming better? Those are all trust-building questions that we could all be asking. Because when we do that, and we do it really well, here's what happens. At the base of high-performing great programs, great organizations, great teams, great consortiums, whatever it is this idea of clarity around I trust you and I trust me. We trust each other. And it feels safe to just have the real conversation about whatever. We don't avoid anything because we all are committed to something better and belonging. Because when we got that, guess what happens? People are more dependable. In other words, they take responsibility for their part in the community. The structure and clarity of this is what we do, this is how we do it, and here's who does what. The expectations and agreements are also in place. The other thing that happens too in this whole space is all of a sudden we have this shared sense of purpose. And the impact of all of that is we get some really great results, but we do that with people that actually it's pretty fun to hang around with. If you go back to this really beautiful muscle you have in here, it's hardwired for connection. It wants to be with you if you show it that you want it to be with you as well. I'm going to pause here. What questions, thoughts would you be prepared to open your camera and share with me or put in the chat so that I can kind of know that I'm not talking into an echo chamber? What are you learning? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What do you want to know? Thanks, Lindsay. Do I know if there's a difference in psychological safety between teams online or in person? So here's what I'll tell you, my own experience of the last year and a half. I had to learn how to do this kind of stuff and online. So I spent most of my time doing work, mostly in sport, actually mostly in person. Here's what I think is what I've learned. There's not a lot of difference between the two. In fact, what I do know and what I am learning and what I am hearing in my own practice is as we come back to in person, people feel actually really uncomfortable or awkward. As much as they're happy to be there, we're all actually having to relearn how to be in relationship with each other, because what we don't know when we all come back together is what was the experience like through COVID. So when people are willing, I've certainly found that the conversations I've been able to have when people feel that they're safely at home, and then we are able to use the technology to actually, go into small groups and have conversations, we can actually build trust. So there's a lot of organizations that are telling me that, you know what, our trust got better because we had no other way but other than to really talk more often, and we learned more and all those other things. So I think that, the lack of engagement here today is a curious thing for me. And I hope it's a curious thing for you, because I think that the more engagement and conversation we have with people, we actually build trust quicker. And to build on the, what you're saying here, Teresa, is trust starts with transparency. Transparency for me is I'm going to reframe it slightly because I do think it matters. Transparency in leadership and coaching for me is making visible to you what I can't see. So your thoughts, wants, and feelings, I go back to my iceberg analogy. You're just doing your due as a coach or as a leader. But when I say to you, here's what I'm doing, here's why I'm doing it, and here's how I'd like us to do this together, I'm actually speaking to now the whole brain. Because if I only tell you what, I'm only speaking to this part of the brain. But if I explain why and how, or if I say, here's what I'm thinking, here's how I'm feeling, and here's what I want or need, that transparency of actually giving a full thought and making visible what people can't see is what led you to your action or your conclusion. Folks, here's what we're doing today in the pool. Here's why we're doing it. And here's how it's going to make you faster, better, stronger, whatever it is you're trying to teach. So when we make it transparent or visible to people, because none of us can read minds. And so it really does become this important thing that trust and safety is about using our language, because communication is the connective tissue. And in human beings, 90% of communication is visual. I think, what was it? Like less than 10% of communication effectiveness where people really understand is words. Tone of voice, body language, facial expression. So it's why right now with you, not many of you having your camera on, I have no read on what's going on out there. Are you all got your face screwed up going, what an idiot? Or are you going, this is interesting, or this is freaking me? I have no idea. But as coaches and as leaders, for us to build psychological safety in this environment or alongside the pool, eye contact, smiling, facial expression, tone of voice, all that kind of stuff matters. Because the more emails you send out, the less visual you are as a person, and people who have words that are triggers to them. Again, right? All these things. I feel included or I don't feel included. Great question. Does trust and safety to me are like two sides of the same coin. It's like leadership and followership. You can't have one without the other. If you don't know how to follow, you don't know how to lead. If you don't understand this relational safety thing that we all need, every single human being at every age. And the more secure the relationships were early in our life, the easier it is for us to build it. The more scary they were, the harder it is over the course of our life, which is why I believe, because you work with young people, you are such an important part of this trust safety dynamic that allows us to navigate the world in a much stronger, more confident, more capable space. So I'm going to draw something. and hopefully you can see this, but I want to talk about trust as if it was like a piggy bank. And this is an exercise that I do with young people and with executives and everybody in between. But I want you to think about trust like a bank account. Everything I say or do is either putting a deposit in your bank account or taking a withdrawal. Think of it like an ATM machine, whatever you want to call it. Piggy bank, ATM machine, investment account, how big you want to call it is totally up to you. So here's the thing. When we think about trust, there's a couple ways we can think about it. And I'm going to come back to the piggy bank thing in a minute. For many of us, when we talk about trust, we say, okay, I'm going to trust you. And then I'm going to watch what happened. And I'm going to look for the proof. So this is my trust. That you are trustworthy. So again, remember, my brain's scanning for proof. Are you trustworthy? I'm looking. But if you say to me, do you trust people? Oh, sure, I trust people until they prove to me that they're not trustworthy. And then there's another group of people that actually say, well, actually, you need to prove to me or show me the proof that you're trustworthy, and then I will trust you. In other words, I'm going to watch you first and judge whether or not I'm going to lean in or not. Both of these models of trust, which are very typical when I take a group through it, normally if all the cameras are on, I'm like, raise your hand if you're 1 or raise your hand if you're 2. That's not going to work today. So here's what I want to introduce to you in the context of a neuroscience-based psychological safety and trust thing is when we as leaders start to do this, I'm going to trust you. And then I'm going to watch what happens. In other words, I'm going to notice your tone of voice, your body language, what you say, what you do, and how consistent you are on that. And if I'm okay with it, I'm going to thank you for it. Wow, thank you for doing that. Thanks for showing up on time. Thanks for putting your effort in here. Thanks for helping so-and-so out of the pool. Thanks for whatever. But I'm going to watch what happened, and the things I really like that you do, I'm going to appreciate it. Because guess what? This little muscle loves to learn in positive environment. In fact, we know we learn faster when our feedback is a ratio of 5 to 1, 5 positives to every 1. And it's not like really specific. Today, what I loved was the way your arms went in the water. Or I noticed that you were really kicking there harder on this lap. Or maybe you were helping somebody, or you're positive, whatever. Watch what happens and trust that. And the things you don't like or you don't understand, that's where you ask a question. So Hans, your question around naturally default to trust or not, I want you to go back to the brain. Is part of it, yes, our default is how safe relationships or environments have been for us personally. So our default will always be where we like to go. So if you were a 1 or a 2, that's where your default is. The lesson or the muscle to build is to actually decide that I'm going to build trust and safety, because I'm going to actually start to define, here's what trust looks like for me, coach to athlete, coach to parents. These are the behaviors. And when I watch what happens and I'm okay with it, I say, thank you. That's great. Please do that again. When you do that, this is what you're doing for the team. That's amazing. Thank you very much. I like seeing people who do X. That builds trust, because we make visible to people what your expectations are, and whether we love it or not, we're hardwired as human beings to want to actually please other people for the most part. So if you want to kind of build trust and watch what happens, regardless of your current default, one of the greatest things using my bank of trust is to actually have a conversation. And there's a handout in Feed Loop that you can download to kind of give you a sense of it. But if you go, okay, not okay, trust, no trust, The conversation becomes, and this is always really fun when I do this with coaches, okay, so what are the behaviors of your athletes, your parents, your people that are okay for you, that build trust with you, or actually are positive or neutral? What are all the things that people can do and you'd be okay with it, would build trust with you? Now, what are the things that you would be not okay with? Or the conversation with kids, I do it in classrooms, I've done it in sports, and I've done it with some of our national teams that just went to the Olympics, is I go, okay, so what are the behaviors on this team that tell us we are a team and that make training as hard as we are? Okay, great. Maybe even fun. Like, you got to have focus, but you got to have fun. What are all the things? And you get people to actually pick their top 3 and you put them up, or you do it as an exercise. And then what are the things that are not okay? And what you're going to learn is what's okay for you might be not okay for someone else. And so then you get to have a conversation around, okay, so what would be so if that's not okay for you and it's okay for me, what's our meet in the middle piece? Because if I give you I'm picking up on what you put here, Dean, too, is start at level 10 and see where the number goes. Here's my question to you is, most people are unaware of their behavior in day-to-day moments. And we can't see how our face shows up or how our body language is unless we've built ways to do that. And so one of the most important things that we can do to build trust and safety is that when we have that feeling of, ugh, that wasn't okay for me, it's up to us to lean in and go, hey, I noticed this or I saw this, and the story I'm telling myself, or I wasn't okay with it, what's going on? Because a lot of times, if you go back to this idea, my brain's deciding very quickly, safe, not safe, feeling, thought, action. Like, it happens like this. Just like when you wrote your name with your pen normally, you don't have to think about it. So people who've repeatedly done the same thing, and I've already told them that I'm not okay with it, well, those are the people that I just say, not okay. We got to have a different conversation. Yes, Stephanie, coaching wearing a mask is a disadvantage. So our words and our eyes and our body language becomes even more important. Or sometimes what I've done with kids is I'm like, who can tell? Like, this is the thing, kids can read faces. So I've done this with young people. Okay, what am I thinking right now? And I'll do the... And it's super fun to play the name my face game with young people, because then there's no confusion. Pick the things you know that you typically would do and get them to know the face without this. They can do it. They're smarter than we are in a lot of cases, because we still haven't beat that awareness out of them yet. We start to kind of put the mask on as adults. And when you don't trust the proof, you got to get curious, right? So I think if we just make assumptions or put story around whether somebody was genuine or not, we will never know, because we've decided to wrap it in a story. And that story is usually based on lived and learned experience. Or if we want to change the story, that's when we have to. So, I mean, we could get into all different spaces about this. But, Stu, the key point here, again, is look to validate or understand. I'm going to watch what happens. If I don't understand it, I'm first going to ask before I'm going to judge. Tell me more about that. What were you trying to do there? Or, hey, I don't know if you remember, because here's the other thing, as creatures of habits, when we start to change behavior or try and do it, it is going to take us at least 3, science has shown us as little as 3, but sometimes as much as 10, 20 attempts to hardwire something new in the awareness to make a different choice. So one of the things sometimes we do is we think people know and they're doing it anyway, or they're just doing it to tick us off. But a lot of times people either don't know or they forgot. And sometimes the gentle nudge and the reminder is really important. If you've never heard of the nudge theory about behavior change, look it up. It's an important thing for us to realize that for us to actually change our behavior, it's actually quite a bit of work for our body and our brain to do that. And it requires will, a willingness, an intention, and practice. So what I would really challenge you to do is to think about your own environment. If you want to build a healthier, safer environment, you've got to start to think about, okay, in our space, in our club, in my program, what are the actions, behaviors, or words that actually are building trust, and which are the ones that are eroding, and how would we start a conversation about that? Because the more you make it visible and you make it okay to talk about, the more safe it is. Because here's fundamentally what happens when we start to actually build trust and safety, one conversation at a time, is when we start to really go, define first, here's what it means, like our team identity. And part of our team identity is what we wear, how we wear it, how often we chain, all the operational stuff, totally important. But it's also about how we're being, how we're showing up. On our team, in our program, this is the way we treat each other. This is what's okay and this is what's not okay. And it's important for us to actually show both and say, which ones do we do really well, okay? And almost like build yourself a column, which is, here's where we're really good today, and here's where we want to be, and what's the stuff we're going to practice in the middle. Because once you know that here's what's okay and not okay, some of the stuff that we do today in our teams and in our organizations lives on the not okay list, but we're all doing it. And so the opportunity for us as leaders and coaches is to go, okay, we're going to try and actually shrink this list and put more of the positive stuff, grow this list. So it's not uncommon for some teams to actually, I worked on a leadership team that we had our okay, not okay list, and we gave ourselves a score at the end of every big meeting. How'd we do today? Not only on what we got accomplished and what we agreed to and who was doing what by when, but we also gave the group a score. So we always had our behaviors that were okay or not okay, and we would give people, we would give the team a score out of 5. 5 was actually we were rock solid, having discussion and debate about what happened most. You can do the same thing with the kids. On a scale of 1 to 5, what's your energy leaving here today? And as long as every number is okay, even if somebody goes, I'm a 1 coach, all right, was the 1 because of you, because of me, or someone else? And what do I need to do or know so that we can move that 1 to a 3 or 4 next time? That's how you engage this part, not this. The 1 is this, speaking from here. The 5 or 6 or the 3, 4, the question you ask is what engages the thinking. What would I need to do? Or what do we need to do to go from 1 to whatever? And what you might learn, it has nothing to do with you, and you might learn something about them that they're willing to share. Totally up to you. At the end of the day, when we invest in behaviors, practicing those behaviors, defining them, celebrating the ones we want, or at least acknowledging them, this is what we get. We get a high performance environment, or environments where, this is what we see. We see people speaking up, sharing ideas and problems. No. Hey, we got a problem here, we got to fix it. Here's what else we start to see is people going, hey coach, I have an idea. Or, hey, we're going to work on this together. And so you start to see co-created solutions versus people always launching it up or complaining too. When you start to see a club where a coach or admin can say to the parent group, we have this problem, or there's some people out there with skills and talent and ambition to work with us to make this go away. Because what we don't want to be is the complaint department for our kids and parents, but we do want to be as a collaborative space that says, how do we make this club better? And are we willing to have that conversation and co-create solutions versus polish the problems? Because to me, complaining is just polishing the problems, and guess what happens? It fires up your emotional brain, which eventually you just go, oh my God, I don't know how much more I can do without feeling I'm like underappreciated, undersupported, and all that other overwhelmed. I flip my lid. Here's the other thing we see is people willing to experiment, try new things, whether it's our kids or others. If we're not willing to learn something new or at least try something on, then we're not in a safe space. Either we haven't created for ourselves or certainly anybody else. And here's the last thing. The most important question you could ever ask to build this part of the brain in a young person is, what did you learn today? What are you learning? And it's also a question as a coach of coaches and leaders. The most difficult question most people have to answer with me. What do you mean, what am I learning, Judy? I'm like, what did you learn? What was the value? Because if we're not actually thinking about what am I learning, we're not learning. And if we're not learning, we're not leading. We're doing the same thing over and over again, which our brain is designed to do. But what that also means is we may be defaulting back to behaviors or habits or practices that is not about building the culture, building the space for connection to happen. So the handout that is posted in Feed Loop is really this idea too, where we start to appreciate that at the end of the day, what we believe in shows up in our behavior. And this is how it works. And this is the way it is with kids and everybody else. So remember my iceberg? I said, above the line is what people's words and their actions and their behaviors. Then there's the waterline. And below that are what they think, what they feel, what they believe about the world and other people in it. And then their identity, who I am. And so here's the thing. If you want to change behavior, you can't change beliefs. So if you don't like the outcome, so this is the way I always used to do it. If you can't change someone's beliefs, you need to believe this. You can't do that because their beliefs are shaped by the relationships and the experiences they've had up until this point, yours included. I can't change your belief system. But what I can do is say, if you don't like the outcome, back up the bus and first look in the mirror. How are my behaviors contributing to this? Or how are their behaviors, actions, contributing to this? Change the behavior and see if you change the outcome. Because this beliefs accessing my potential, which accesses my behaviors, which is my outcome, that's the learning loop. My beliefs are formed by my attempts at things, and whether that was met with encouragement, support, good, healthy feedback, then that potential keeps getting tapped into because I got feedback that helped me see what I couldn't see and learn what I needed to learn. And so my behaviors start to become, I'm working harder, I show up, I'm practicing more. And my outcome is I start to see, look, I'm getting faster, I'm getting better, it feels easier, I can actually breathe and I'm not. And then my belief becomes, I can do this. And whether you're 5, 15, 25, 55, 75, this is how we learn, and our brain is for everybody. If you don't like the outcome, back up the bus. What am I saying or doing that's getting in the way? And the only way we're going to change behavior in others is if we change our approach in ourselves first. We get more curious, we listen to understand, and we accept and appreciate and seek feedback. This is, how can I get this more out of you? Simple. Not always easy, because it also requires a level of awareness in ourselves that we may be part of it, because we're born in relationship, we learn in relationship, we coach in relationship, and we are only 100% responsible for half of that relationship. And until we take 100% responsibility to get curious about what the other person's thinking, feeling, wanting, we're missing the boat. We're guessing. Dean, is there a sector that I work with? Oh, do people? I don't know. There's lots that are, but I think there's also a piece in place where I'm going to say this, Dean. I'm not sitting here in judgment of any of you. I'm going to say I believe, and this is my experience in education and in sport right now, is the way we've taught adults is not actually inspiring, interesting, or engaging enough. We've designed learning around the expert in the room. And as much as I hate talking at people, I'm hoping I'm leaving you with some things to think about. But if you really look at true adult learning principles, we need to give people an experience. And here's the thing, I call it adult learning because that's where I spent most of my time. But when I go and look at popular pedagogy and also some of the design of some of the learning that I see otherwhere, I think we're missing the opportunity of giving people an experience. And then watching or getting curious around what their reaction or their gut tells them. How do they feel about it? And then what did they learn? What's the so what? So it's like the cycle goes like this. What? Gut. So what? Now what? And so what's the experience I've just had? The gut is, how do I feel about that? Did that feel good or not good? So again, safe, not safe. Now what? So did I get support from people to tell me, okay, what was the meaning of this? Or how can I make meaning of it? And why would I want to do more of this, even though it feels hard or difficult? Because our ability to build potential in others is born by actually people giving us feedback. And I don't believe we live in a feedback-rich environment in our education or our sport sectors for coaches. Or if the feedback that we do give isn't always particularly positive and frequent enough. That's my observation. I don't need to be right. It's just my own personal experience. But I do think what you're trying to do here and the opportunity for all of us as coaches is, what do we need to learn about learning? For ourselves, but also for those we coach. And what we do really well in our country is deliver very good technical programming for a lot of people. Here's what you need to do. But what I'm introducing here and have for the last 3 years in our sports system is this idea of, who do you want to be? Or here's how you really need to be if you want to up your ability to have influence, impact. So you're the coach that people go, thank you for being life-changing, not only in the pool, but you helped me become who I am. Simple, it's not easy. So coaching isn't just what you do, it's who you are and how you show up every time you walk into practice or into the office or wherever you are in the coaching system in Ontario. Who are you being? Or how do you want to be? And how could you have conversations with people a little bit differently? Because if you really want to build psychological safety wherever you are, some of the other things that we need to do, whether it's the bank of trust conversation, we also need to actually admit what we know, what we don't know, and when we're wrong. So when we can actually be a human, others feel safe to be human with us. When we ask for the team's input, what do you think? And we actually listen to it. And if we don't understand it, we say, tell me more. And what else? And how would you do that? And when people doubt or complain, rather than react to it, respond to it with curiosity. Curiosity, or the quality of your questions, will be your superpower if you play with that. In other words, take why and do and does and get it right out of your language. And for the next 3 months, practice only asking what and how questions. And every time you ask why, pause and reframe it and see what you learn. Because all you're doing, back to with what and how, is you're lowering the waterline and seeing a little bit more behind why people are doing what they're doing and what they're understanding or not understanding. And we're taking away judgment, assumption, and story. What if we forgave mistakes faster? We're very good at holding grudges. Very good. And creating, so the more politics and drama you have in your organization, and the more meetings after the meetings, or talking about people versus talking to them, the less trust and safety you have. And here's the crazy thing. And I've taught my kids this. When you don't engage in drama and say, sounds like a really good conversation for you to have with the other person, how can I help you get ready for it? Or, you know what? I just don't want to have these conversations anymore. Well, we become less reactive, more responsive, and we start to call people's BS. If it matters enough to you, go talk to them, because they don't know what they don't know. Well, they should know. They are the blah, blah, blah. They don't know. And that's a human tendency. So this is the other thing I'm going to tell you. I'm kind of going off script, but hopefully this is of value. In human conversations, these are the 4 stages that, to me, drive drama and lack of trust and safety. In conversation, it's usually adult to adult, but here's how it rolls. Something's going on. I'm not happy with it. So maybe in the spirit of trust, right? I trusted you, and then I watch what happens, and I've got this big question mark. Here's what most of us typically do. First thing we do is rationalize, it's not that big a deal. I'm going to avoid it. Not big deal. I don't want to be picky, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to avoid it. That's the first stage. But let's say I'm watching what happens and you keep doing that thing that's starting to really bug me. So what do? So the more it bugs me, guess what happens? The more my emotional brain starts to fire up. I might be more frustrated. I might be more irritated. I might be more anxious. I don't know, whatever the situation is. But the next thing I do is I start to complain. Now that complaining could be, oh my God, what a jerk, in my head. Or I might start shopping around for sympathy and complaining about that person's behavior to anybody who is willing to listen to me. Now, here's what I want you to understand. The more I complain about someone, and I make it a who problem, not a what problem. So the what problem is the behavior. It's not the person. So the more I complain to other people, guess what? It's like a boil on my arm. It's getting bigger and redder and redder. And then one day, that person's going to come along and do that thing that they do that I've been watching what happens, that I've been avoiding and complaining about. And it's like they jump in and they actually hit this really sore boil on my arm. Well, then I lose it because it hurts. And I'm now really freaking mad or really freaking upset or whatever I am. And so guess what I do? I overreact. How could you do this? And I overreact, whether publicly or personally, but I overreact. I lose it. And then what I do, because then I realized that that didn't look so good, is rather than go, wait, you know what? I've been avoiding a conversation with you and this behavior is driving me crazy and the impact on me, the team, or the organization is this. And I don't understand why you do it. And I really wish it was. So rather than do that, what do? I lecture. And my lecture can look like an email that's about 67 paragraphs long, CC'd to like half the world. Or I might lecture at you in my head as I basically give you the cold shoulder and maybe even, the one finger salute. Lecturing can look like a lot of things, but have I really had the conversation with you because you do not know what you do not know, but now you're reacting to my overreaction and have no idea why. All I know is you flip your lid, I flip my lid, and there is absolutely no thinking, no rational ideas around how we're going to solve this problem together. Versus when I know I'm complaining, that's my chance to look at myself and go, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And what do I need? To build back trust, or at least understand why you're doing what you're doing. Now, you can be a jerk to me and just tell me where to go, in which case I'm going to trust that that's your MO. Or I can go, look, I'm not trying to make you look bad or feel bad. I'm just not liking it. It's not working for me. So how can we find a way? That's a very different conversation than what I'm doing here. Because if we have an agreement where these are the behaviors that are okay and not okay, because expectations with no agreement is an exercise in frustration, which actually makes this happen. But if I actually say to you, hey, here's what's okay for me, here's what's not okay for me, and how do we want to deal with those moments where we're different? Because the best high-performance programs and the best high-performing leaders have built a game plan for how to deal with it, because conflict is inevitable. We do not all think and feel the same way. But when we approach conflict with curiosity, we can make it healthy. Because we cannot innovate, we cannot change, we cannot reimagine, we cannot get better unless we build the trust and psychological safety to be curious, to be kind, to see things from multiple perspectives and say, okay, here's where we're the same, here's where we're different. Remember, communication is the connective tissue between your brain and my brain. And the more visual, the more so voice and video and face-to-face is so much better than text, WhatsApp, email. Worst. Trust and psychological safety are the foundation for great teams, great programs. The coaches that keep winning most, or the ones that people keep thanking the best, are the ones who've learned how to make relational connection as important as technical and tactical competency in the area that you have decided to train in. The difference between coaches who have great long-term careers and those keep getting fired and moved around club to club are the ones who have chosen to just tolerate the relational thing or not invest in understanding how to do this better. What you do and how you do it, technical knowledge and experience, and the energy and the emotional connection you know how to build relationally with others. And you do not have to be best friends, but you do have to know how to build relationships in such a way where you're okay, I'm okay, and together we're going to figure this out so that you can do your best at what you do and I can do my best, and together we can just move this team, this organization, or your performance forward, whatever context we're trying to put it into. I'm getting down to, so I'm going to finish with this, and I'm going to say if there are any questions in the last 5 minutes. Otherwise, I will stop my yattering at you, and hoping that there was some value in the conversation or the content that I've tried to deliver to you. Here are the 3 fundamental skills that you need to act, and I've touched on them, and I'm going to keep coming up. If you want to level up the conversation and become the absolute best coach you can be, up the quality of your questions. Listen deeply. Not only what people are saying, but the emotion behind what they're saying and how you learn how to validate it. So the opposite of validation is criticism, comparison, and judgment. You are not listening when you are trying to be right and needing to compare it to where you are versus where they are. Simple, not easy. This is the muscle we have to build in terms of your brain and my brain, is how do we up the quality of our questions? 3 is feedback. How are we finding every example and experience to develop belief that people can do it, they can take action based on what we're doing, that we actually are building the character and the courage to try new things, and that we're actually helping people build their know-how. That's me actually using feedback as an acronym. But is yours helpful or hurtful? And if shaming and blaming or comparing or making somebody look silly in front of others is your MO, it needs to stop. Because in an environment where safe sport is getting more and more important, the opportunity, especially I hear complaints about the rule of 2, these are conversations we can have in community with our athletes, with our kids, like the stuff we can do with our kids. Make it a game to develop these things. Make it interactive. There's so many tools out there for curious enough to do that. Trust is a muscle. Trust is a belief system, and trust starts with you. And so when we lean into being more curious to understand what we need to trust, and then say, what do you need to trust? That's the beginning of a foundation that allows us to navigate all the tough stuff and to rise above and deal with performance in multiple, operationally, financially, socially, and in the pool, like we don't see. I can tell you right now, I'm spending all day tomorrow with our national women's hockey team, building and going deeper on these 3 skills. We started 2.5 years ago. We've done 2 layers of this, and we're going that level deeper. Because what we're saying is the performance under pressure and our ability to read each other and be able to get really clear on this is the way we play our game. And it's like, you get to do this in your own program. Like wherever, you can do it in your own family, because our families are the first teams that we coach. And we are the first leaders of our kids. And when we teach them what, being seen, heard, and known looks and likes, sounds like, and feels like, they'll also make choices later in life about who they choose to work for and who with, and when they're going to say, this isn't cool, it's not okay. And our kids are getting smarter about that. And I think we have an opportunity, and certainly my passion is, how do we help coaches to make simple, maybe not always easy, choices to build the will to create programs that actually build great people and great places, and so that you have some fun too. This is not about just what you get to do for everybody else, but hopefully it's also about what are the habits and practices or the things you'd be willing to start so that you can actually make work a little bit more fun for you, especially after the year and a half that you've had to deal with. So thank you. I don't know whether there's a question or two, or whether, we're best just to say thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. But I'm hoping that I've left you with a few things to think about. Trust is a muscle. You're the birthplace of trust and safety, and your role is really important. So thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Just as a bit of Judy has a Q&A session tomorrow at 4. I believe. So if you didn't get a chance to ask the questions today, or you wanted to digest a little bit and find some questions for tomorrow, then certainly feel free to jump on with Judy at 4 and have a conversation with her. I'm sure she would appreciate that. Thanks, Judy. That was great.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for remembering and let people know that, because it really is Ask Me Anything. And you will learn as much by the questions that are asked, I'm sure, and the conversations we can co-create. If you want to just lean in and see where we go.
Okay, and just a reminder, we do have our inclusion panel tonight at 7. Another great opportunity to build on the discussions that we had yesterday with Laura McPhee. There's a whole other panel of individuals, but jump on and listen in. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Bye now.